Hi, everybody. It's Tamara from Moogly, and I am thrilled to be with you today for this Yarn Inspirations Lunch and Learn. Now, there's always a couple minutes delay because we are live, and I want to be able to see your comments and questions. So please bear with me for just a second here while I get the video loaded up on the monitor in front of me. All right, it looks like we're live, so go ahead and hit that like button. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let Facebook know that we really are live right now. So let's get to it. As I said, I'm Tamara from Moogly, and this is a Yarn Inspirations Lunch and Learn. Today we are talking about pumpkins and all things fall. Now, there's a pumpkin roundup coming up soon on yarninspirations.com if it hasn't snuck up on there this morning. But specifically today, I want to focus on a particular pattern, the Bernat Crochet Felted Gourds. This is a new pattern on yarninspirations.com. They should be dropping some links up there in the description if they haven't already. I know they were in the description for the event today. But particularly, I want to focus on one of those gourds. As you might have guessed from the title, this pattern actually includes 5 different patterns. Pumpkins in 2 different sizes, butternut squashes in 2 different sizes, and a beet, which is really fun. Today, it's a lunch and learn, so we don't have all day. So I thought we'd focus in on one of those, which is the small pumpkin you can see right here. This is just a really cute sized pumpkin. We're using a 6 weight or super bulky weight yarn today that I'll be showing you very shortly. Another fabulous new yarn. So if you can't get a hold of this brand new yarn and you want to grab something from your stash, I'd recommend trying Bernat Blanket or Bernat Shapey, or you could use a thinner and smaller yarn and just end up with a smaller pumpkin. Of course, these gourds come in all sorts of sizes in real life, so you can use whichever yarn you like to get the look you want. Now, you can see this one right here, very cute. To make it, I used, as I said, a brand new Yarn Inspirations yarn. This one is called Bernat Felted. You can see I've started using this skein to make my pumpkin already. This is a really fabulous, unique new yarn. This is the first project I've made with it, so the first chance I've had it to use it. But it is just, it's got a really unique feel and look to it. And I think it's going to be absolutely gorgeous for all sorts of home decor projects. Now, this one is currently only available in Canada. It's coming to the US very soon, so you get a little sneak peek of it today if you are in the US. So again, use those substitutes if you need to. So let's go ahead and switch on over to the hand camera and get started with our little pumpkin. Alrighty, making sure I can see you all too and see what's going on. There we are. This is our pattern today, the Bernat Crochet Felted Gourds. And right here, this one is the small pumpkin that I'm making. You can see I chose different colors, but that's the fun of crochet, right? We always choose different colors than what's recommended. That said, I do want to point out that Felted has this great teal color. I'm guessing this is the lake color. And that is great if you are one of those people who likes to put out a teal pumpkin at Halloween as well. So here's a slightly closer look at that pumpkin we're making today. Again, this is the small size. The large size is very similar, just a couple more stitches and a couple more rows. Here's a closer look at that yarn, new Bernat Felted. We'll flip this over here. You can see it is a 6 weight yarn, and it is machine washable and dryable. 62% acrylic, 21% wool, 17% nylon. And here you can get a little look at what it looks like closer up. So as soon as you can spot this in stores, you can add it to your yarninspirations.com order. You will definitely want to check it out. As you can see, it kind of looks like it's already been felted, but of course, now we can crochet whatever we want with it, or knit, I suppose. So today I will be using the Sienna Fleck colorway for the main body of the pumpkin. And then for the stem of the example, I used this coal version. If we manage to get to the stem today, I might make it in this just so it's a little bit easier to see. Sometimes those dark colors just don't want to show up on camera. So, as I said, here is the pattern we're following. We're going to be making the small pumpkin today using a USJ 6mm crochet hook. This is a Twist and Lock by Susan Bates. If we turn our page here, our pumpkins actually start on page 2. So if you want to follow along, the small pumpkin, we want to follow the instructions in red or black. And if we were making the large pumpkin, we'd be following the yellow, so we just ignore those today. This page, the pumpkin instructions do go on to the next page, so just be aware of that if you're following along. So let's go ahead and grab our yarn here. I want to get it to focus in well for us here today. Pull up some more of it here. Get that focus on the camera to come back down to the yarn. There we go. All right, so to begin our pumpkins, let me get my instructions where I can see them too. We are going to start with a chain of 4. So I'm going to go ahead and put a slip knot right on my hook. Oh, get that adjusted there. And this yarn, because it basically feels like it's already been felted, one thing to note, it does not have much, if any, stretch to it. So that's just something to keep in mind as you do your chaining. If you're working back into the chain, we aren't for this pattern. We're just making a circle to work into. But if you do decide to make a project with this yarn and you want to do some chaining, you may want to make sure that those chains are just a little bit looser than you might otherwise make them so that they're easier to get back into. So let's go ahead and get started here. We start with, after we've got our slip knot on our hook, a chain of 4 that we're going to then join to form a ring. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, let me move the kind of backside yarn here out of the way a little bit so we can see better. Can you see just how fuzzy that is? You can see we don't get a lot of stitch definition with this pumpkin. That's not a judgment, just an observation. Sometimes you want stitch definition and sometimes you don't. So this is going to be a really fuzzy project and yarn to work with. So that's something to keep in mind too, especially since this isn't available in the US yet. If you want to try this pattern first with a smoother yarn, it's not a bad idea, especially if you're a newer crocheter. So after we've chained 4, we're just going to go ahead and join with a slip stitch to that very first chain we made, however you like to do it. Again, you're not really going to be able to see the details of this anyway. We just want to make a ring there. If you prefer, you can do a magic circle or a magic ring. It doesn't really matter. We just want a ring to work into. Then we're going to go ahead and begin our first round with a chain of 1 or 2. We're going to be doing half double crochets, so 1 or 2 is really a personal call. Officially 2 is the right answer, but it does not count as a stitch here in this pattern. It just counts as a turning chain. So whichever you prefer with your own personal gauge, whichever gives you the best look is fine. So now we're going to go ahead and start crocheting into the ring. For the small size, we want to work 8 half double crochets right into that ring. So we're not going to any of the individual chains. We just want to go right in the center of that circle. And since this isn't a magic ring, we can just go ahead and let that tail end hang. We don't need to make sure to work over it with all of our stitches or anything. Now, I mentioned how fuzzy this is, and you can see for yourself just how fuzzy it is. So that's where having some stitch markers comes in really handy. I really like, especially when I'm working in the round like this, I really like to mark at least the first stitch. There we go. They didn't want to come apart. At least mark the first stitch, if not the first and last stitch of each round, just so you don't get confused or lose your place. The fuzzier the yarn, the more helpful I find that to be. So there's 1, and we need 7 more for a total of 8 for the small size. So there's 2, and 3, and 4, halfway there, 5, go ahead and squeeze those in if you need to, 6, and if you do work over the tail, it's not a problem, 7, and 8. There we go. Just want to squeeze all those stitches right there into the circle. Now you can see there's still a little bit of a gap there. When we go to weave in our ends, before we stuff our pumpkin, we will need to do a little bit of stuffing later. Then you want to take your yarn needle and try and close that up with some sewing as best you can. We don't want to leave a hole in the bottom of there if we can help it. So if you are a big fan of the magic circle, I would go ahead and substitute the magic circle there. That said, it's going to be a little harder to pull on this, so either way, you're probably going to have to use the yarn needle to finish closing it up. So after we have worked our 8 half double crochets into the ring, we can go ahead and join with a slip stitch. But before I do that, I am going to take a moment just to put a second stitch marker in that last stitch of the round. That way we don't get confused with that slip stitch in between, and we'll always know we're starting in the right place and we're ending in the right place as we work around our pumpkin. So I just want to get my hook right in there and make my slip stitch. And now we're ready for round 2. For round 2, we simply chain 2 and work 2 half double crochets in each stitch around. So I'm just double checking, making sure, yep, that's exactly what it is. So we had 8 stitches in our first round, we'll have 16 in the second. I do like to take the stitch marker out while I'm working into these stitches. So there's our first stitch for round 2. I'll go ahead and mark the top of that stitch. Get my hook back in there, second stitch in that same stitch, and then we can go to the next one and put 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. So right now it is pretty simple, but starting with round 3 here, we're going to start making puff stitches. I need to pull up a little bit more yarn. There we go. We're going to start making our puff stitches, and that's what gives this particular project a little bit more texture. Puff stitches are really fun. They're sort of a variation on the half double crochet, typically. And they just add such a fun bit of pop and dimension. And in this yarn, they really look quite beautiful. So I'm just working my way around here for row 2, putting 2 half double crochets in each stitch. Thank you all so much for joining us if you're watching live, and thank you for watching later if you're watching the recording. If you come in late, this recording will stay up on the Yarnspirations Facebook page, so you'll be able to refer to that later as needed. Alrighty, so I'm just almost all the way around here. This is why it's so handy to have that stitch marker in that last stitch. I know that's the last spot. I need to put a couple of stitches here. So there's 1 and 2. Oh, now this stitch marker wants to be in the way. So we'll go ahead and move that. There we go. Right back in that same stitch for the last one. Since that was the last stitch of this round, I'll put that stitch marker back in. There we are. And then we can slip stitch to finish off round 2. This yarn, like I say, it's really fuzzy, so it can be very difficult to see, if you're going in just the right spot. But that's the benefit too. If you make a mistake or end up slip stitching to not quite the right spot, as long as you get your stitches in there, it's all good. Nobody's going to be able to tell. So while I'm making this pumpkin, definitely tell us in the chat what other things you guys might want to make with this yarn. It is really such a unique look. It's just going to be a lot of fun. So now we're ready for round 3, where we finally start making those big puff stitches to add all this great texture to our pumpkin. So again, you can start with a chain 1 or 2, whichever you prefer. Since puff stitches are about the height of a half double crochet, again, it's personal choice. Now, to begin the actual stitching, we start right away with our repeat. So that's the section that starts with the asterisk. We work a puff stitch in the next stitch, and then a single crochet in the stitch after that. So let's go ahead and get this stitch marker out of the way, and we'll make a puff stitch right here in our very first stitch. Now, puff stitches can come in different sizes. Here we're using probably the most common one, which involves yarning over and pulling up 3 times. At the end of this, although it will be hard to see because of the fuzzy yarn, we'll have 7 loops on our hook before we yarn over and pull through. So here's our first one. We yarn over for the second one, go into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. There we are. Now, like I said, it's a little hard to see, but that's 3 loops, right? Yarn over again makes 4. Go back into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. Same stitch. It will be tight, and that's okay. So that makes 5 loops. Yarn over again makes 6. Go into the stitch for a third time. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Now we've got 7 loops on our hook. Let's see if we can pull them apart here and see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I don't know if you can see that on camera. I could barely see it in person, but they are all there. So to finish the puff stitch, now we yarn over and pull that through all these loops. To do that, to help keep it from getting caught, it might still get caught, but to help with that, I like to point the hook portion of my hook down. You can kind of see how it's pointing down towards the body of work here. And then as I pull through, I'm going to actually pull up on that hook to create as much space as I can sort of underneath those loops so I can pull through. So I've yarned over, I've pointed my hook down, and I'm pulling up on those loops. And let's see, pulled right on through without getting caught. Doesn't work every time, but it definitely ups the odds. So that's my little trick for working puff stitches. So after we work a puff stitch in that first stitch, we can go ahead and mark the top of it because that is the first stitch of the round. And because you can see I'm right-handed, so mine's off to the right here. If I was left-handed, it would be off to the left. The top of a puff stitch definitely has more of an angle off to the right than a lot of other stitches. So it's really helpful, particularly with puff stitches, to mark the top of that stitch. So after we work that puff stitch in the first stitch, we simply single crochet right in the next. And that's our repeat all the way around. Next one's a puff stitch, so let's do that again together. You can see, again, just how fuzzy this yarn is. If you're having trouble figuring out where to put your hook, try and feel. That's my best advice. Bright light and a white table like this is helpful so you can see those little holes, but in the end of the day, you kind of have to feel there's a hole here, and now I can feel there's a hole here right underneath those top 2 loops. So that's where I know I need to go in. So I pull up a loop. Now I've got 3, yarn over for 4, go in and pull up a loop for 5, yarn over for 6, go in, pull up a loop for 7, 7 loops on my hook, going to yarn over, make sure that hook is facing down and I'm putting tension on the top of those loops, and pull all the way through. All right, let's keep going. And let me know too what you guys think of puff stitches. Puffs, popcorns, and baubles are all kind of a class of stitches, although they're all made very differently. They all create great texture and can be used in such fun ways. Single crochet in the next, time for another puff. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, just like that. Yarn over, pull through. All right, go to the next stitch, single crochet. Now, you can see as I'm doing this, it really wants to cup up towards me this way, showing kind of the wrong side as if it were the outside. It's not a big deal if that's happening. You can just flip it back out this way or just keep working with it cupping up towards you. Does not matter in the least. Go to the next stitch for another puff here. So yarn over, active loop, yarn over, pull through is 3. Yarn over is 4. Pull a loop for 5. Yarn over for 6. Whoops. Drop one sometimes. That's okay. Let's see. We've got 1, 2, 3 there. So we've got our yarn over for 4. Go back in. Pull up our 5. Yarn over for 6. Go back in. Pull up our 7. Yarn over and pull through all those loops. Single crochet right in the next. Alrighty, so we're just going to continue working our puff stitches and single crochets all the way around here. Thanks so much for tuning in. I see Nebraska and Washington all over the place. I really appreciate you spending time with us today. Just going to continue working around. At the end of round 3 here, you should have a total of 8 puff stitches and 8 single crochets. Won't really have to count the single crochets. Just want to make sure you've got one in between each puff stitch and that you've got 8 puff stitches around. That's going to be a whole lot easier to count. So far here, we can see they're actually a little easier to see here from the wrong side. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we know we've got 2 more. Right in that next one, get our puff stitch made. In Canada. Thank you for tuning in from Canada as well. All right, let's see. There's one more puff stitch. Pull up a little bit more yarn. Single crochet in the next. Now we've got our last puff stitch for this round. This will be number 8, and that's good. We've got one more stitch after that to put our last single crochet into. Remember, we started this round with puffs, so we want to make sure we end with single crochet. So we have a single crochet in between each of our puffs. There we go. So there's our last puff stitch for that round. Single crochet in that very last stitch. So we'll want to move that stitch marker up to the top of that single crochet. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and push it right side out so I can join to that very first stitch with a slip stitch. There we go. So you can see we're already starting to work up that first bit of texture there right on the bottom of our pumpkin. Now, round 4 is the same thing, a lot more puffs and single crochets. For round 4, we are simply working 2 puff stitches in the first stitch, then a single crochet in the next. 2 puff stitches in the next stitch, single crochet in the next. So let's do a few of those together. I want to make sure to value everybody's time here. The next few rounds are primarily, like I say, just puff stitches and single crochets. So let's do just a little bit of that here before we move on to the next little bit that I want to make sure to cover. So again, start with a chain 1 or 2, whatever you prefer. Then you put 2 puff stitches in 1 stitch. So what does that look like? Let me get good and centered here. We yarn over, go right into that first stitch, pull up our loop. So there's 3 loops on our hook, 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. Yarn over and pull through. We can go ahead and mark that first stitch again. There we are. And then you want to make sure to put your same puff stitch right back in that same stitch. Now that part's not so much the tricky part. The tricky part comes in where to put the single crochet that goes in the next stitch, because we want to make sure that we're increasing this round, putting 2 puff stitches in the stitches where we increase. After putting that second puff stitch in here, it's very easy for that next stitch to kind of get lost, almost hiding back here. So if you need to, if your puff stitch is kind of covering up more of your fabric, you can go ahead and just give that a little tug. Make sure you feel these were worked in here. So this is the very next one right here. That will help you avoid accidentally skipping any of those stitches. And then we just continue that around. 2 puff stitches in the next stitch, single crochet in the next stitch, all the way around. When we do round, that would be for round 4. And then for round 5, we work a single crochet in the space between 2 puff stitches. So that's why I wanted to do this right here, so I could show you what that looks like. When we come all the way around, and it's time for round 5, we are going to work a puff stitch in the puff stitch, but then we single crochet between the puff stitches. So what does that look like? Well, assuming, I had worked all the way around, I would still have an active loop, of course, on my hook. But then when I go in to put that single crochet in, I want to just, as much as I can, pull these puff stitches apart a little bit. You can really use your fingers. You don't want to pull the actual puff stitches apart, but pull one apart from the other, I should say. Right there, and find that space. We're going to be putting our hook right between those 2 puff stitches. Right there. So as you do that, it may essentially end up looking like you're going into the top of that second stitch. And if that's the look you end up with, it's totally fine. But we're working in a puff stitch, and then we're going to put a single crochet right between them, and then go into the next puff stitch. So that's how we continue to increase for this pattern. Eventually, we get to the point where we're just working puff stitches and single crochets all the way around. Again, due to time, I can't make it all the way through this beautiful pumpkin, but the instructions are really well written. The decreases are pretty simple. A lot of them are just skipping stitches, so that's a very easy way to decrease. When we get to the top of the pumpkin, there is a round where we do some single crochet 2 togethers. So if you've never single crocheted 2 together before, let's do that real quick here. Put that loop back on my hook to single crochet 2 together, which again, we wouldn't do to the top of the pumpkin, but just to show it right here, we go into the next stitch and pull up a loop, and then we go to the next stitch and pull up a loop. 3 loops on our hook. That's a little easier to see than 7. Yarn over and pull through all 3. Of course, now they want to stick when there's only 3 of them. There we go. So we worked into 2 stitches, but we've only got one of those little V's, 1 stitch there at the top. So that is our single crochet 2 together. At that point, we're at the top of our pumpkin. When you get to the round before the last round, though, you do want to take the time to make sure to stuff it. Now, it's kind of hard to tell here on camera, of course, without being here in person, but I didn't use an overly large amount of stuffing. I didn't stuff it in real hard. I left it pretty squishy. You can see right here. And one of the reasons I did that, after closing up the center there and stuffing it and closing up the top, was I just wanted it to be a little lighter, and I wanted to make sure that it squished down a little bit at the bottom. Working in a ball like this, if I had made it really stiff, it might have tried to push sort of the bottom out like that, if you will, and then it would have been roly-poly. So just stuff it till it feels good to you so that you can kind of flatten out that bottom and make it sit really nicely on your table. Excuse me. So the last bit for making our pumpkin here, after we've made all those puff stitches up to the top, is the stem. So I used the darker color for the stem, but you can see just how dark that is. It's kind of hard to see. So let me pull up a little bit more of this lighter color so it's a little easier to see here on camera. Pull up some more yardage. Alrighty. And then if you're looking for the pattern, be sure to check Yarnspirations. I know has been dropping different links and things in there. So, and if you're looking for the pattern, if you need to Google it or search it, you look for Bernat Crochet Felted Gourds. This is the small pumpkin from the gourd set. So to make the stem, Again, you'd want to use a different color than the rest of your pumpkin, unless you don't. Everybody can do it their own way. But for this one, it starts off a little differently. So I just want to go over that because it does have one other move to it, if you will. We're going to go ahead and start with our slip knot on our hook and then chain 2. And even though we're making a big circle here, we're not going to slip stitch and join to create a ring. Instead, we're going to work 8 single crochets into the second chain from the hook. So that would be that first chain you made right back by the slip knot. So again, super fuzzy yarn. You can go into it basically wherever you like and start making those single crochets. So there's 1. You probably ought to mark these 2, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep going. 2, 3, 4, and we want 8, so 5, 6. You can see I'm working over that end, but you don't really need to. This is just where you wanted to lay. 7 and 8. Okay, so very similar. This time we're working single crochets though. We've got 8 single crochets into that second chain from the hook. You can see that's just another way that you can start a circle. So after that, we join to that first single crochet we made. And then from there, it's pretty clear cut, but round 2 has one other little special move. We work in the back loop only for round 2 and only for round 2 of the stem. So for this, we go ahead and chain 1 and go right back in that first stitch, and we're going to work in the back loop only. Now, this is going to be a little bit trickier with this yarn. We've talked about just how fuzzy it is. So just do your best. Look for the top 2 stitches there, and then you want to try and get your hook under just the back loop, which is the one that's furthest away. The front loop is always closest to you. The back loop is always furthest away. So if possible, just put your hook right in the top of that V and try and pick up just that loop, that back loop only. Then we can go ahead and put our first single crochet there. And after that, we're just working even. So we're just work 1 stitch in each stitch around. We're not increasing or decreasing. So we find the next stitch and try and go under just that back loop only. So as you do this, since we're not increasing, this is going to pull in really quickly. There's our third one. I'm not using my stitch marker, so I have to kind of keep a mental note here. 4. You can see how it really wants to cup up right away. 5 and 6, and by this point you're probably going to want to go ahead and turn it right side out because we're not increasing. This is going to be forming that stem shape. We're working top down, and it's going to cup like that really quickly. So we've got, oh gosh, how many was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think. 7. There we go. And 8. All right, so that should be all the way around. Looks right. Find that first one. Go ahead and join to a slip stitch under both of those loops, like so. And there you can see it just creates a really nice detail right at the top of our stem. Now, if you wanted to weave in this end, you can. You don't have to, though. It can just kind of hang out inside your stem. After you sew it on, you can see it actually closes up really nicely at the top. And by working in that back loop only, it just gives us a really nice turn down the sides of our stem and a nice kind of really flat top to it. After that, it's simply chain 1 and single crochet around, going back to working under both of those loops just as you normally would. When you get to the final round for your stem, you do a couple of other moves. Let me go ahead and pull these out of the way here, actually. When you get to the very final round for your stem, and again, the height of your stem will depend on what size you're making, and really, it's your project. You want a shorter stem, don't add as many rows. You want a longer stem, add some more. Make it however long you like. For the very final round of the stem, though, we do something a little different here. We are going to chain 1 and then half double crochet, followed by a double crochet in the same stitch. Oh, running out of yarn again here. Let me get that through. Pull up some more yarn. And then half double crochet in that same stitch again. Then we single crochet in the next stitch. And then do that again. Now this is where it gets a little unusual, and this kind of threw me off too. I had to go back to the pictures to figure out if I was reading it correctly. If you look very closely at the stem of this small pumpkin, you'll see how it pinches in a whole bunch right here at the bottom. When we are making that last round for our stem, we make, for the small size, we make 3 of these lobes. For the larger size, we make 4, but then we skip any remaining stitches and join with a slip stitch to that one right there. So you can see right here on mine, let me pull that a little closer here. It's kind of hard to see now that it's sewn on, but there's 1, 2, and 3 lobes, and then there's a few stitches left at the end. We just skip over those and join with a slip stitch, and that actually pulls in that sort of pinched look at the bottom of our stem. Now, there aren't any instructions on how to add the stem for the small pumpkin or the large pumpkin, but I just simply left a long tail after I did that final join, and then sort of whip stitched or running stitched, a little weird combination of the two, all the way around the very top of the pumpkin. So you can just kind of use your sewing needle, do your best to sort of tack it around and sew it on really well. If this is something that was just going to sit on a mantelpiece and not get touched, you could theoretically glue it on with some fabric glue. But, you know, it's yarn, it's soft, it's squishy. Everybody's going to want to pick it up and give this pumpkin a squeeze. So I'd recommend sewing it on as best you can. And with that, we've hit our time, so we'll go ahead and switch back to the other camera. I want to thank you all so much for joining me again for this Yarnspirations Lunch and Learn. And if you are looking for this pattern, if you didn't grab that link yet, it is the Bernat Crochet Felted Gourds, and this is the small pumpkin. I hope you'll give it a try, and also give Bernat Felted a try. It's a really unique yarn, and I think it's going to give a really interesting look to all of your home decor projects. So thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.